Good morning and welcome to the webinar talking about the RFA for the current Southern Ipm Center Enhancement Grants for 2016. We're just getting a few things settled here to be able to start this presentation so you can see our screens. And we were going to walk through the RFA to highlight all the different sections of it that we're expecting our applicants to apply to, and also answer any questions you may have. For GoToWebinar, you probably noticed over on the right, we've got a little panel where it says questions. Type them in there, and during the webinar, we will get those all answered. With me today are Denisha Seth Carley, who is the other co-director of the Southern Ipm Center. I'm Joe LaForest, and we have Jean-Jacques Dubois, who is our evaluation specialist. So we're all here to answer questions and make sure you know everything about the RFA and answer any questions. So the 2016 RFA that we have released is available online. You can find it at the links that are in the RFA. We have links to pretty much all the research sources you're going to need in order to find information about stakeholder priorities, forms that are needed, and everything else. This RFA is released annually, so look for this next year as well. This is the model we've looked at for funding this RFA is outcome-based. We're expecting that the projects that people undertake in the southern region are going to have great impacts on the world. They may not have impacts in the initial project period, but people are doing good work, and it's not work that ends after the RFA is over. They have their own programs at their universities, and we want to couch all these proposals in the notion of you're going to have outcomes from your program. This is one step along the way. If you're curious about some of the projects that have been funded in previous years, you can use this first link to go into the PPMS system, where it actually talks about all the different projects that have been funded. And the purpose, as you would guess from all of our projects we have, are to further IPM, that we want to use this science-based approach to manage pests in ways that generate economic, environmental, and human health benefits. The Southern Ipm Center is funded by USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture, or NIFA, and they look at us to address these issues for the southern region. For this particular grant program, there's approximately $220,000 available, with most projects ranging between $30,000 to $40,000, depending on the type of the project. And we'll talk more about project types in a little bit. People who are eligible to apply are a fairly wide audience, including private individuals, institutions, faculty and staff at four-year universities, businesses, commodity organizations, fairly wide swath of people. And the projects can be in any commodity or setting, as long as we're talking about IPM. And IPM is being used to manage pest populations or help people to adopt new technologies to do that. So we have a wide variety of environments, including forest health, wildlife, livestock production. It really just matters that it's IPM. We do ask that potential applicants, if you've been previously funded, you've filed all your previous reports. That's a requirement for you to be funded in the future. We also have a restriction that the primary project director for the project has to be from within the region, from the 13 states in the southern region. That doesn't mean that you can't include people outside the region to work with you. It just means that the original project director needs to be within region. Another feature we also have for all of our projects is they have access to our Facilitation of Innovation through Technology program. Essentially what this is if you want to use things like GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, MailChimp, EdMaps, any of the Bugwood services, they are at your disposal, and we will help you to use them within your program. provide you training and some of the technological support. The purpose is to let biologists handle the biology, and we'll handle the technology, so you don't have to necessarily have all that infrastructure worked into your grant. Focus on the content. We'll make sure the technology is there for you. This comes at no added cost to your project. So it's a way for many of our working groups to do something they couldn't normally do if they had to support all the technology. These are by no means required. There is nothing in the scoring of the RFAs that says, well, they used it, we're going to give them extra points. It is purely an option we want to make sure you know is available so that if you want to use it, it's there. I'm actually the contact for that, so when you have questions in your project about what would be available and how you could use it, I'll be the person you'll be talking to so that we can make sure everything's lined up. And one of the most important parts of this RFA is the due date. Friday, November 20th, 2015 at 5 p.m. Proposals are due. They have to be in the PPMS, the proposal system we use, and already all the materials need to be up there by that time. In the RFA, we then went into talking a little more about the purpose of it and providing some links to things like the Ipm Roadmap, a document which has been used for a long time for people to couch the terms of their proposal and help us understand more about how their project is helping to fulfill that Ipm Roadmap. And here we have the overall purpose of our Southern Ipm Center, which, as you would expect, is to increase the coordination and efficacy of Ipm research and extension efforts, facilitate collaboration, and promote development and adoption of Ipm. And this is structured along a wide variety of topics that we have here. The ways that people approach these different topics then is through the different project types we have. And there are 3 that are currently in this RFA. Our first are seed projects. These seed projects are where someone has an idea to start something off, initiate something new that's going to hopefully grow into something wonderful in Ipm throughout the region. These could be pilot projects. They could be early research that's being done on new methods for control. They could be tools that are being developed to help growers better utilize research information or better control their pests. There's something that it's brand new, you need something to get it off the ground, and it's a good seed to start from. Many of our seed projects go on to be funded by other groups, that they got the initial data from a Southern Ipm Enhancement grant, and then they pursue something like an AFRI or a specialty crop grant, because they have that initial data which helps them take it to the next level. The next section of projects we have are called Capstone Projects. These are where people have already had efforts going and they say, if only we had these additional sections, if we had this expansion, we could do some really great things with what we've already started to develop. So the capstone is bringing that last piece in place to really help make something better and move it forward. Both the seed and capstone projects are limited to $30,000 a year. That is with 30% indirects that are allowed on the projects. That 30% indirects is taken off total federal funds. The third type of projects that we have are called Ipm working group projects. We realize that a lot of how Ipm gets done or how things get developed is not by one group getting together and figuring out how they're going to solve all the problems, but people from all over the region coming together who face the same issue, discussing those things, and then figuring out how the group can work together in order to have projects that are successful in addressing whatever situation is out there. These projects vary in how much money is allowed for them, from $10,000 to $40,000. And that depends largely on the type of working group that you're starting up, whether it's one that's already in existence or it's new. We realize that with a new working group, sometimes it takes a little while for the group to figure out their direction, their priorities, where they want to go. And so new working groups are eligible for $10,000 for just team building, getting the group together, discussing the issues that are currently out there in a particular area, and then coming up with priorities for how they will address those in the future. From that point, we have our existing working groups who often have some output-based activities. They have programs they'd like to put on, they have materials they'd like to develop, they have research they want to pursue, and so they actually have a project up to $30,000 in order to pursue that. The top of page 5 shows this matrix of new IPM working groups versus existing IPM working groups. That new ones are the only ones that can have team building only. But after that first year, they're expected to have output-based projects, something that actually is moving things forward and not just getting together to discuss what's going on. An existing working group can choose to do only an output-based project or a combination of team building and that for a total project budget of $40,000, with $10,000 still being used for the team building. We already went through the eligibility in the summary up above. For submission of the projects, we do have specific guidelines of the information we want to see in your application, and that's what most of the RFA is geared towards. At any time, if you have any questions when you're working on your RFA or you're working on your proposal, you get to a certain point and you just want some feedback, you are welcome to contact any of the center directors or our staff with questions on it. Danesha and I have our contact information at the very end of the RFA. So even though we're on this webinar currently to answer some of these questions, if there are additional questions in the future, you still have a resource to go to. So the first part to do is actually, most of you have probably gone to the site by this point to actually find the RFA and download it. And in there you have these lists of all these components that we have. Many of these are forms that your grant office is likely going to fill out. Download the forms, get with your grants office, and look at how we look at the required fields for the different information regarding contracting state, project title, the funds being requested, and a summary of the proposal. There's also a standard cover and assurances form, which your authorized organization representative will fill out and sign. Many of you have probably seen this as a cover sheet for your proposals and your systems. A lot of how we look at these different projects are focused on a logic model. Many people looking at logic models for the first time get a little concerned because it's something they're not really familiar with. What the logic model really is a snapshot of your entire proposal. It's looking at where your proposal fits with the situation that's out there in the real world, what inputs you're bringing into that, and where you're going to, how your project is going to address that. We have provided a template at the end of the RFA on page 20 and 21, which helps lay out this logic model, and also talks about a lot of the other portions we have in the system, in the project narrative. So as you're going through the narrative, we really recommend that you look at the logic model first, fill that out, and it'll make it a lot easier to fill out these other sections of the RFA as you're going through. The sections of this RFA, the sections of the logic model start off with a situation. What is the current state of the things you are trying to address? So if there's a problem with a new invasive insect, or people not necessarily understanding certain aspects of IPM, or you need to have some more additional research, this is explaining what the current situation is, and so that the panel has a good idea of what your project is trying to address. The next section is on inputs, which talks about what staff, expertise, materials, facilities, equipment you're going to put into this project? What are you bringing to the table so that this can be accomplished? The next section is on the outputs. These are the things you do, what you're going to produce that people are going to look at or interact with. So this is either conducting an experiment, developing materials you will be distributing, creating a database that houses information to deliver it. It's an actual product or activity you're releasing. And then we have a section for participants. Who's involved in working on this? Who's coming to the table to make all this happen? It helps us identify how this is strategically set up to be successful because of the people participating in it.
Joe, may I say something?
Please.
Okay, this is Jean-Jacques, the evaluation specialist, and this is to say that the participants and the outputs are really the audience. It's not necessarily the researchers doing the research. So in other words, those people would be in the inputs. So the outputs are, for example, the audience to your workshops. They're the people who read your brochures, and the target audience. In other words, that's all.
Thank you very much. All that stuff that Jean-Jacques mentioning, working with that target audience then is supposed to lead to different outcomes. That's why you're doing your project, is to have some change in knowledge, attitude, behavior, skills in the audience you're looking at. So the outcomes section there is talking about what the short, medium, and long-term impacts of your project would be. We fully realize that it is not practical to expect a one-year project to have long-term impacts 5 or 10 years down the road that are being measured within this particular project. However, we're asking that they're listed here so that we have a good idea of the context of how you see this effort contributing to a long-term impact. So you're not having to measure things in the long term, even though it's a one-year project. We just want to understand where that fits in the overall scheme of how you view the world and how this will all come together. At the bottom of this, then, we have indicators. These are ways that we measure what's being put into the project, what activities and products were actually produced, how many participants were actually reached, and then for your outcomes, if you are actually able to have outcomes within a one-year project, what those were. Was there a survey of growers to find out how much they knew about this topic? Was there a change in their knowledge during that period? Or did they actually start changing their behavior to do something differently? At the bottom of it, then, we have assumptions, which are ways for you to highlight certain pitfalls that may come in, that you assume that a particular pest will actually be out in the field. You'll have significant populations to actually perform the work, or you're assuming that growers want to use a certain format of information in order to learn about IPM and move forward. And then there's a section for external factors, things that could happen that are just out of your control that may affect the project. These two things help identify certain areas that need to be looked at and likely have been accounted for in your project. As I said, the logic model really is a great snapshot of your entire project, how it fits in the situation, and how it fits in contributing towards long-term impacts. That's where a lot of the rest of the RFA comes from. And so we're actually going to leave this up here in the corner as we talk. You can kind of see the colors that are associated with it. And as we look at different sections of the RFA, I'll be pointing over to that section just so you can see where in the logic model these particular sections might come from. With your logic model, it is limited to one page, which is the diagram itself. There is then a second page which could be used to describe the logic model. However, that's reserved for people who are using a different template from what we provided. We do like our template, but it's not for everyone. So if you have variations on that you think are going to help explain your project and how on how that will contribute to changing the situation and getting long-term impacts. We encourage that, and we provide an additional page for discussion on how you change the template and how people should be looking at it to interpret your diagram. I've said it earlier on, I'll restate it at this point again. We highly recommend that your logic model is the first thing you look at, because from that, your project narrative will be much easier to write and fill out. The project narrative then has many sections to it, each with their own page limits. We did this to kind of break up what you have to look at and make it much easier for you to write directly to what we need to know the project will be a success. The first is a standard title page. Project title, who's the primary project director, the names of the other people who are working with you on the project as your co-PDs, how much is requested, and what type of project you're looking to do. That's limited to one page. The next section is the problem and justification. And we've given you 2 pages to talk about what is the challenge you're trying to address. What is the situation in the real world that we need this project to address to hopefully come up with something that will impact it in the future. So you've got areas here to talk about what the problem is, justify why it's important, what the economic value of the commodity is, how it's affecting production practices, how growers are currently viewing this information or what they've requested. Oh, and very importantly, address stakeholder priorities. We have a number of stakeholder priorities that are listed on our website, which is where this link takes you to. The purpose of stakeholder priorities are to provide additional evidence that people in the region are concerned about these things, and they want some projects to be focused on addressing these. That helps us know that the project is actually not only important, but actually relevant to the southern region. The next section in the project narrative is planned outputs and anticipated outcomes, limited to 2 pages. And we've actually provided a tabular format to help organize how this information would come out. That there's something you plan to make, which would go in the first column. You're expecting that to have an anticipated outcome, which comes in the second column. And that addresses certain parts of the problem or priorities. So if we're looking at the logic model, your planned outputs are the sections in green. Your anticipated outcomes are those in red. And in this particular logic model template, you see there's different sections to it with a 1, a 2, and a 3, or at least 3 sections lined up there. That's where people have kind of different sub-themes within their project. They have certain objectives they're trying to meet, and they say, if I do this, this, and this really well, that's really the 3 prongs to how we're addressing this issue. It's not limited to 3. However, if there are many different objectives within our sub-projects within something, it really dilutes down the value, and honestly, there's only about $30,000 to $40,000 available. So we're not expecting to see many sub-projects put within what you're working on. What this section is designed to do is show us the logic of what you're planning to do, how it is actually going to have an anticipated outcome, and what part of that problem you are targeting with it. You're welcome to modify the table to add different sections so that if you do have sub-projects or separate objectives within it, they line up between what you're seeing in the logic model and what's here in this table. The next section we have in the project narrative is the indicators and milestones. This is looking at how do you know that you've reached success, or how do you know you've fulfilled a particular activity that you're going to be doing or an outcome that you're looking at. How are you going to measure change? The indicators and milestones, Jean-Jacques has put a lot of detail in here talking about different types that are different ways to format what you might be thinking about in your project. That perhaps we're producing 3 different brochures that'll be created, or we're going to have these number of tests that are going to be used in the project for your outputs. The indicators do go all the way across inputs, outputs, and outcomes. It's what you're measuring throughout the project, and if you're planning to have a certain number of something, how you know that you've finished out to have 3 different projects or 3 different publications that were made available. You're only including in the indicators and milestones section what you're going to be measuring within this particular project. The purpose of the table is to inform the reviewer's assessment of what you're planning to do and what this is actually going to fund. As we talked about before, the logic model is a little more inclusive. It's looking at some of the long-term things. So we're asking you to highlight in that logic model what things you're actually looking at within this project and which ones are things that would ideally be looked at in the future to measure those outcomes. But they aren't included in this particular section of the project narrative. So here's the example of the table that was provided, talking about different milestones, who's going to be responsible for that, and when they plan to have it due by. As with all plans, the dates you're putting in here are what you expect at the beginning of the project to happen. It is fine if these plan completion dates change as the project develops or other things come along. The next section of the project narrative is the evaluation plan, limited to 1 page. And in looking at all the indicators across the project, how are you going to measure those things? Some of those are fairly simple. We know how many publications we've actually printed. We know how many field plots we had out there. It's just informing us if you're looking at some of the things in terms of actually surveying people, getting up with them and figuring out how you're going to get these indicators. We understand the methods you're going to use. We then provide an additional page for you to discuss different materials, methods, and relevant technical aspects to a project you may be looking at. This can be especially relevant for seed projects. If you're looking at a new technique that hasn't been tried with a particular pest, this would allow you to describe the procedures, how those experiments be performed, so that the review panel has a good idea of how it would actually happen and the feasibility of the methods that are being proposed for the given outputs. The next section goes into resources and expertise. This is where you have an opportunity to brag about your team. If you've got a lot of great folks working with you, you're looking at what they're bringing to the table, how they're interacting within the project, and where that's going to, how that's going to contribute to the success of the project. It really helps you sell your team as this is why this group is perfectly suited to carry out this project. There is a section provided for literature cited. There is no page limit on that. However, we do watch that that is not used to put in additional information that would help inform the RFA. We have our page limits in place for a reason, to make it fair across all people who are applying. So literature cited helps provide references for things that you may have cited in your narrative, but should not be used to supply additional information. There are then a number of additional forms outside of that project narrative that we ask that you fill out. One is the key personnel and institutional units involved. There's a PDF online that you can download and fill out. Your budget form in Excel. This is where you're listing out all the different materials, contracts, salaries, benefits, everything associated with your project. There are indirects allowed on these projects up to 30% of total federal funds. If your university has a lower negotiated rate with USDA and NIFA, you need to go by that rate. However, this is what's allowed under this particular RFA. We then also ask that there be a budget narrative supplied. This is explaining the different items that you have within your budget so that people understand what the purpose of everything is that you're looking at. Many of you who have done projects before are very familiar with both the budget and budget narratives that we have. I will mention that for our budgets, we have an Excel form that we expect all PDs to use. Please download it from the site and use that to fill in your information. It is the one document that is not converted over to a PDF when you submit your proposal. We then have many of the typical forms you ever see with a grant application. Your current and pending support forms with the templates provided for that, conflict of interest, and the CVs, 2-page CVs of your current personnel. Finally, in your project, there is a section for appendices. This is where, if you have letters of support from people saying that they're going to work with you on this project and confirming their intent to participate, you would put it here. This is also where you could have other information. If you had a sample of certain materials that were being developed, that could be supplied here. The purpose is to inform the grant panel that if you've mentioned certain collaborations within your project, yes, these people are committed to doing it and they're willing to support what you're doing. Towards this part of the RFA, we get into looking at our evaluation and selection criteria. And I highly recommend that at some point when you're writing, you take a look at page 17 of the RFA, which is our proposal evaluation score sheet. This has all the different things that our panel will be looking at when they're scoring your proposal. We've gone through each section of the RFA and tried to line up what you see in the score sheet with different sections of it. So you should be able to see what we're looking for in those different sections, and this may inform how you look to be writing in those parts. And as I mentioned, we have a whole staff that's available to answer different questions for you. We're actually going to the point now that we've pretty much gone through the RFA, highlighted all the materials that are in there. If you have any questions at this time, please enter them into that question box so we can answer them. We really want to make sure that we understand clearly any issues you're having with it. As I mentioned early on, this is an RFA we release every year. So the feedback you give us helps inform additional years. So if you have any questions on anything we presented here, we have myself, Denisha, and Jean-Jacques available for you. Please type them into the question box on the GoToWebinar panel, and we'll answer those as we can.
Joe, while we're waiting for folks to come up with questions, since I don't see anyone typing quite yet, you might give a very quick ad for FIT, since you mentioned it right there.
I did mention it here. This is what we mentioned up in the early part with the introduction, that if you're looking for technology to support what you're doing, if you've got an outreach effort and you're looking to do email newsletters, if you're looking to have web conferences, do a webinar similar to this, to reach people, we have all those services available for you. If you're looking to have early detection efforts for new invasive pests, we have smartphone apps already in place that could be used to facilitate that so that you don't have to worry about that section of technology. We'll support that for you. We have systems for doing content delivery, for delivering images, presentations, video to wherever you need it to be. Or if you just want advice, if you're looking at a project and saying, you know, we have our own IT crew, they're awesome, but we have some questions about how this might work with other folks or if this could be appropriate, give us a call. That's what the entire purpose of FIT is to help with the technology. Biologists are wonderful people. We shouldn't force them to be IT specialists at the same time. Still seeing no questions in the question box.
Joe, you did say you're recording the webinar and folks can refer back to it.
Yes, this webinar is being recorded. It will be online. on the Southern IPM Center YouTube channel, which if you go to youtube.com/Southern IPM Center, you will find it. So you can always refer back to this. You can always come back to us with additional questions. Something that you will also appreciate on that channel is the PPMS tutorial. Everybody loves trying to figure out how to submit their proposal. So Alex Belkis has actually produced several videos talking about how the proposal and project management system works, how you actually access the system as a project director, and how you submit your proposal. So when you get closer to needing to submit stuff, I highly recommend going to those to help alleviate any technical issues you may have. So I thank you all very much for attending this webinar, finding out more about our grants program. We are always available. You have our contact information at the end. Please give us a call if there's any questions you have, or even if you have ideas you want to ask us, would this be appropriate for this particular RFA? We're happy to talk with you about it, troubleshoot some ideas, and help you make the best proposal you can into this RFA. Thank you all, and I look forward to seeing your proposals.